Shalom, and welcome to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. This is a recording of a Shabbat teaching with Rabbi Rebecca Schatz.
In this week's Parsha, we are learning the last few plagues. So we had the first 7 in let's call it last week's, but this morning's Parsha. We actually didn't read them if you read on a triennial. And then we have the last 3 plagues in next week's Parsha, or this week's Parsha that we're going to learn about today. So what are the last 3 plagues that we have in Parshat Bo? I know. Right. Well, we can. So Dam, Tzvardeya, Kinim, Arov, Dever, Shchin. That was last week's Parsha. So, Barad. Yeah. So one of the plagues that happens in this week's parsha is choshech, is darkness, and arbe, choshech, makabra. Yeah. I think I said barad. Actually, that wasn't your fault. It was my fault. And one of the aspects of choshech is that when we say the word choshech, we expect that it just means that the lights were turned out, or there was a blackout, or we lost power, right? Back in the day where there was no power to lose, at least in a light sort of way, choshech was a really scary thing. The whole prayer, Hashkivenu, which is a prayer that we say in Mariv, and is something that you say right before you go to bed, is a prayer all about darkness and how scary it is, and to have God keep us safe during the darkness. So darkness was not an easy time for anybody living before the creation of electricity, or just general safe ways to have fire. And so when there was a plague of darkness, the rabbis first wonder, well, okay, there was darkness all the time. Why was that such a big deal? And it turns out, based off of how we read the Torah, but also based off of commentaries, that this was not just a darkness of it was dark outside, there was no sun, but it was an emotional darkness. It was a physical darkness, right? Meaning you could actually feel it. You could touch the darkness, which is hard to understand and imagine. But if you've ever been in a type of darkness where you don't know the space, like not your room when there's a blackout, but imagine being somewhere where you don't know the layout, you don't know what you're going to step into, or bump into, I should say, step on, bump into. And so that darkness is actually quite frightening because you don't know how to navigate it. Spaces that we know really well, even if it's dark, we know how to navigate them. So though it might not be our preference to not have light, it's not as scary in terms of our physical well-being when there's a blackout. Okay, we're going to read the Torah piece around this, and then we're going to look at some commentary. So it says, Vayomer Adonai el Moshe, Nateh yadcha al shamayim, vayhi choshech al eretz Mitzrayim, vayamesh choshech. So this is how most of the plagues begin, which is put out your arm towards the sky, right? Either locusts come down or put your hand down, and then blood is in the river or in the waters. And so we here are seeing that Moses is being told to put his arm up, right? Because, that's where the light is coming from. And then there's going to be darkness upon Mitzrayim, on the land of Mitzrayim. And then it says, Vayamesh choshech. And this darkness was something that was touchable. So when you say Vayamesh, it means that it was tangible is the word to use. So Vayet Moshe et yado, and so Moses holds out his arm, al hashamayim, vayhi choshech afela, and then the darkness fell upon the whole land of Eretz Mitzrayim for 3 days. So this wasn't just oh wow, it's dark, that's tough. It was 3 days of this dense darkness that could be touched and felt, and experienced. Lo ra'u ish et achiv. So this is the part that's really now starting to describe the type of darkness. So you couldn't see your brother. A man could not see his brother. Velo kamu ish mitachtav shloshet yamim. And so for 3 days, a person would not get up. Mitachtav literally means from his tush. For 3 days. So he just sat where he was for 3 days. So he wouldn't get up from his place for those 3 days, and all of Bnei Israel had light in their dwelling spaces. So what do we know? What do we know about this particular darkness, this particular plague?
It immobilized people.
Okay, it immobilized people. Great. Okay, so we seem to imagine from the last 6 words here that the Israelites were not subjected to it. Now, interestingly, it didn't say that beforehand, right? It didn't say that about the not getting up, the not being able to see your brother, but it did say that they had light in their dwelling spaces. So it's unclear to us if when they walked outside, they still experienced darkness. And therefore just inside their homes they had light, or was it the case that they themselves kind of carried the light, and therefore anywhere they were, right, anywhere they were in a dwelling that they would then dwell, would be light. So it's written very creatively and ambiguously, I think for a reason. I think it's trying to get us to imagine why them versus us type of thing. Any other questions or things that we know here?
Well, this darkness is so, I mean, they use the word thick, but,
Yeah.
For it to be that tangible.
Right.
Like there was a couple years ago when the power went out, our neighborhood had a power loss. It was some, mudslide.
Sure.
Our particular area had no power. It was so scary.
Yeah.
It was just
Right.
like, oh no.
Right. Right.
And I remember thinking about, is this like the plague in Egypt?
Right.
It feels that scary.
Sure.
So
Sure.
uncertain.
Sure. Right. That uncertainty, I think, is something that darkness definitely brings with it, that we don't know. Sometimes we don't even know what's causing it, but we definitely don't know when it's going to come back. And that uncertainty makes us uneasy. But yeah, to your first point, it was something that was felt, right? I don't know if any of you experienced that crazy fog that we had recently, maybe like a month ago, where you couldn't see like 4 feet in front of you. I mean, it was really dense fog, and it was because it was warmer on the ground than it was in the sky, and that combination.
It was terrifying. I was driving.
Yeah.
I couldn't see past the end of it.
Right. I took a picture when I came home one day, I think from work, I don't remember. And I came home, it was dark, and you couldn't see to the end of like the row of homes on my street, right? Which is insane. Like you could always see to the next row of homes. But so though you couldn't feel it, right? Like it didn't feel like something, you can feel it. Like when you go outside and you feel like almost suffocated by how dense the air is. And that must have been what the darkness was like. Yeah, Joey.
Yeah, well, you probably know this from driving up and down I-5 to the San Joaquin Valley. There's the Thule fog that can stick around for days or even weeks on end.
Right. There are places that have this type of dense fog, right?
Yeah,
So
I remember experiencing that. Have you ever done that when driving up and down there?
probably, because I lived in Northern California, so probably, yeah.
That's
So there's what we're talking about here is very similar, except for it's a darkness, not a fog, right? So it is something that is all of the things that everyone just described, right? Uncertain, scary, unable to see through, something that was affecting certain people and not other people, right? This is a real, to me, this is the plague that is the scariest, right? The others feel a little bit fantastical. This one feels very real, actually. This one to me feels like a very real possible plague. Okay, so then Sforno is gonna explain it to us a little bit. So it says Vayamesh choshech. So Sforno is gonna comment on this idea of it being a touchable darkness. This will remove the normal darkness called night. So interestingly, this is not just night. This is beyond night, right? This is something now that is a different kind of darkness. The reason this was necessary was that the night consists of air ready and capable to absorb light in the morning. The darkness that would occur now was something unable to interact with light at all. So we're not just talking about in a few minutes it's going to be dark outside, but then we expect that it's going to be light in the morning. This was a type of darkness that even if it became morning, it wouldn't affect it. It would remain dark. So, again, this was not the absence of sun. This was a different kind of darkness that was taking over the entire land. The reason for this inability to interact with light was the density of the texture of this darkness. As a result of this totally different kind of darkness, lo ra'u ish et achiv, for even a lit up flare would not be able to make a dent in that darkness. So imagine like a wall, right? If you put up a wall over the lights in this room, even if the lights are on, you're not going to be able to tell that there is light. Right? So that's what they're talking about here, is that he is talking about here, there is some type of impediment to the light. It's not just a switch over from moon to sun. It's the actual inability for light to get through. And I think that is in some ways also commenting on this idea of not being able to see your neighbor. Right, that there was this blockage that people had, that they were not able in this darkness to recognize, to see, to acknowledge, to talk to bring their light into the homes of their neighbors. So if we wanted to drash that out a little bit, this is not just a physical darkness, this is also an emotional darkness, as the bar mitzvah kid talked about earlier today. Right, there's a freedom that is internal and there's a freedom that's external. So it's possible that these people were feeling their own type of darkness, their own type of hardship, their own type of burden from you name it. There's lots of things going on, and they are feeling like they are in the dark, right? And that there is nothing that is going to bring light to them. And that this idea of darkness, like what's the word I'm looking for? Like taking away the light or being the opposite of the light is not what they were dealing with here. They were dealing with a constant darkness, no matter if the light existed or not. Thoughts on the Sforno piece or the drash that I just gave on the Sforno piece?
That feels very real.
Yeah, it does feel very real. Yeah.
Polarization, closed-mindedness.
Yes.
Even our own capacity to discern and to
Sure.
have insight.
Right.
It feels so present.
Yeah. Right, it's like a blockage, right? There's something that's not allowing us to permeate the world that allows us to speak to people or listen to people or imagine the goodness in people. And so there's this block, there's this darkness that just kind of hovers and lingers. Okay, anybody else? Or should we go with the Rashi?
There was something
Yeah.
about, in Vayera
Yeah.
about not knowing God's name. Or
Yeah.
that kind of thing where the not, like we were missing something that we weren't being able to perceive it or acknowledge it or recognize it. It wasn't shown to us.
Mm-hmm.
And so it feels that way as well.
Mm.
We have the ability, but we don't always access them.
Right, that we might have the ability to understand or see or even create the light, but we don't always know how or do it or find the ways to make it possible for it to happen. Yeah, that's a really good point. Okay, Rashi. So Rashi is now talking about just the darkness in general. There was darkness of gloom when no man saw another during those 3 days. No person saw another person during those 3 days. And there was moreover another period of 3 days, darkness twice as thick as this, when no person rose up from their place. One who happened to be sitting when this second period of darkness began was unable to rise, and one who was then standing was unable to sit down. So Rashi is commenting on this period of darkness as one that just made everybody freeze, that they weren't able to actually move forward in any way. People who have gone through immense grief, especially if there is some kind of horrific tragedy or a very surprising sudden death, often people will describe their grief like this, right? Like I can't even get out of bed, right? Or I can't bring myself to put on my clothes, right? You think to yourself, all of that seems so mundane, right? But when you can't see a way out, you're unable then to do those tasks. I talked about this in my sermon earlier this morning, that slavery for the Hebrews, unlike the slavery of blacks in America, was this numbness to just general hatred and feeling like, okay, well, guess this is what's happening. So when God comes and says, hey, I'm actually going to take you out and you're going to be fine, just keep on keeping on for a little while longer, the people can't hear him, right? And the people can't hear him because they're slaves. The people didn't lose their hearing. They can't hear what God has to say because they've become numb to this crazy slavery that they went through, or in the moment are going through. So it's the same kind of idea, right? That you're stopped in your tracks. You are frozen in time, unable to even see what could come next, because this reality that you're in, though it might not be a great one, just seems to be the reality that's going to go on forever. Yeah, Irv.
I had a friend who had a car stolen.
Yeah.
2 days she was like, no big deal.
Sure.
2 days later, she kept repeating over and over again. It was like she was in a mourning period.
Right, the violation of something being stolen and not knowing how to like get yourself out of that, right?
Yeah, I got her out of it, like going to the park, walking around, everything else.
Sure.
Laughing at the end of the day, but it's amazing to see.
Sure.
Just completely.
Right, which is why it's interesting that we can read this and think to ourselves, oh yeah, I know I've been through this kind of frozen state, or I know someone else who has, and this is real, right? This is a real darkness. And again, when we hear darkness in the 21st century, we're thinking like mental health and deep depression. It doesn't have to be deep depression. It could just be that someone's car was stolen and they just don't know which way is up or how they're going to figure things out. Or someone might be in a terrible relationship and not know how to get themselves out of it, right? There are lots of different ways that you might just become frozen. And again, with this like block of darkness in front of you, such that even if wonderful things are happening all around you, you're unable to see them. You're unable to appreciate them. Okay, Rashi continues to say, oh, sorry, I thought I got rid of all the he's here, but why did God bring darkness upon them? Because there were wicked people amongst the Israelites of that generation who had no desire to leave Egypt, and these died during the 3 days of darkness so that the Egyptians might not see their destruction and say, these Israelites have been stricken as we have. And a further reason, that was just one let's call it a midrash, that was one of Rashi's ideas. And a further reason is that the Israelites searched, the darkness came just in order that they might do this, and saw their Egyptian jewels. I really don't like this midrash, I'm going to start off by saying, but I'm going to read it anyway. And saw their jewels, and when they were leaving Egypt and asked them for their jewels, they replied, we have none at all in our possession. They answered them, I have seen it in your house, and it is in such and such a place. Talk about violation of privacy. What Rashi's talking about here is this midrash from Tanchuma, and then it seems like it's potentially from Exodus Rabbah, I don't know, from Shemot Rabbah, that the darkness was created so that the Hebrews had access to homes and to possessions of their taskmasters, of their slave owners, such that they had the upper hand when this was all over. Now, on the one hand, when we took the trip to the South, on the one hand, there are like harrowing stories of slaves who did similar things to their slave owners and were able to, come out of it with, not necessarily with stuff, though I'm sure there are stories of that too, but just with the upper hand, let's say. This is just, is saying, well, when it's dark, you should hop around and see if you can find some stuff so that then you know that there are jewels that you can have later on. The reason I don't like that is I still don't think that, I don't think that two wrongs make a right, which is basically what we're saying here. And the people were slaves to these really horrific taskmasters. So you can understand what they might be doing here, which is trying to get something for all the hardship they went through and saying like, sorry, this is what you get for being my taskmaster and treating me terribly. I don't love that as a reason for the darkness. It is a midrash that is written, so I felt like I should share it. I think that puts, no pun intended, I think that puts our people in a bad light. I would like to think that our people were even in their toughest moments, were a better people than that. But that's just me. Any thoughts? Wow, Bob, you are our 10th. We will now have a minion for Mari. Thank you so much. Anybody have any thoughts on that, on the Rashi piece here?
I don't like it as much as you.
Yeah, great. Okay, so we're all on the same page of not liking it. Sounds good. Okay, so turn the page. We're going to look at Chizkuni here. This I think is very interesting, and I think I wrote a drosh on this last year, maybe it was a few years ago. But Haya or Moshvatam. I think that's actually. Oh yeah, no, that's right. Moshvotam. So they had light in their dwelling spaces. Now, Paul, this might be where you're remembering this from. It doesn't say who the they are, right? It doesn't say what having light in their dwelling spaces means. But the way that we understand this is the way that Chizkuni is going to explain it to us. It's noteworthy that the Torah here does not refer to the province of Goshen as it had during other plagues, meaning we're not talking about a specific location, a specific place on your GPS, but implies that Israelites living in other parts of Egypt were also not affected by this plague. So that's one way of understanding it. That somewhere, elsewhere in the region, they also didn't have the darkness, even though the Egyptians did everywhere that they lived. Our sages claim that when an Israelite entered the house of an Egyptian, they were able to see normally in that house also. What does this mean?
That the Israelite could go to the Egyptian's house and rob the jewels?
No, that was the last one.
He has life in the house. Or is it also saying that if I'm in the Egyptian's house, the Egyptians also have life?
That is exactly what it's saying. But what does that mean?
It wasn't affecting the Egyptians. It was affecting the area.
What wasn't affecting the Egyptians? No. Let's read it one more time. When an Israelite entered the house of an Egyptian, they were able to see normally in that house also. So what's that implying?
The lights with the Israelite.
Yeah.
Wherever the Israelite is, that light goes
Great.
back.
So it was like, I don't know if any of you remember this video. I was young, but there was a video for, my gosh, what was the name of the band? Anyway, whatever, for some song, and there was like a thing on top of everybody's head that when they would walk around, there was like a light, and then there was also a number because it had to do with your lifespan. The song did. If it comes to me, I'll think of it. It's on the tip of my tongue. It's very close. If I break it into song, that's the song I'm talking about. So what this is implying is that the Israelites had light, not a flashlight. They were light. And so when they would go into an Egyptian's home, which, by the way, gets rid of the midrash of taking the jewels, because it wouldn't have worked, because if they were light, then they couldn't have gone in and stolen the jewels. So if they were light and they were going into all these homes, what is that also implying? That we weren't doing it. That the Israelites were not going into the Egyptians' homes. And for all of us living in today's day and living amongst lots of, whether it's anti-Semitism or just racism or stereotypes, this is poor community building. This is poor relationship building, right? The idea is that if you have something and you know that someone else does not have it, you should share it, not keep it from them. So the fact that our Torah tells us that the Israelites had light and that the Egyptians did not, and that within the Israelites there was light, but the Egyptians still were in darkness, what the Torah is saying to us is, hey, you didn't do anything with your light. You kept it for yourself. Yeah, Brian.
I'm wondering if to whom the he applies. Is it to the Egyptians or is it to the Israelites? We know that the Israelites had light in their dwelling, so is maybe Hiskuni is saying, if an Israelite goes to a dwelling that's not his, he, the Israelite, can still enjoy light, but the Egyptian still can't.
So the Hebrew seems to apply the Egyptian. She'afilu keshehaya Israel b'veit hamitzri. So when there was Israel, literally, in the house of Egypt, in the house of an Egyptian, b'mitzrayim haya or imo. So within the Egyptian, there was light in him, with him, on him. Yeah. So it seems to be implying that if the Israelite had just gone into the house of an Egyptian, they would have had light. But the fact that the Torah tells us that there was no light in any of the Egyptian dwellings, it seems to mean that the Israelites weren't doing anything to help them. Now, by the way, when you are a slave or you are being persecuted by a people, it's not like you're thinking, wow, I would really love to help those guys out, right? You're not thinking that. You don't see Holocaust movies where the Jews who were in the camps were then also trying to help the Nazis somehow get food on a night where it was hard for them to do so. Absolutely not. That is not happening. And that's not because they were bad people, meaning the Jews, right? They were not bad people. But it is interesting to think about that if you knew you had something that someone else needed, that you kept it from them. Was that a tactic? Was that self-preservation? Was that just because they had the upper hand finally in something rather than the rest of their slavery? Who knows? But it definitely is a very interesting sociological dissonance here in our Torah. Anyone want to say anything else about this? Okay. Okay. Sorry. Now I'm rushing, which I didn't think I thought I was gonna have to. Okay, go to the back. We're going to look at some modern sources now. I want to look at the Harold Kushner, Nelson Mandela, and Martin Luther King piece. I added the Martin Luther King piece because Monday is Martin Luther King Day, and I thought it would be nice to have his voice addressed in the room as well. The Aviva Zornberg piece is very interesting, and it talks all about dehumanized rights. So feel free to look at that at a different time. Okay. Rabbi Harold Kushner says, perhaps the Egyptians were depressed by the series of calamities that had struck them, or by the realization of how much their own comfort depended on the enslavement of others. The person who cannot see their neighbor is incapable of spiritual growth, incapable of rising from where they are currently. So this is very similar to what I spoke about this morning, which is when you are in a moment where you are being shut down and told that you are small and told that you mean nothing, it is very, very hard to imagine any type of growth. Right. And so to see here that if you can't see your neighbor, right, this is taking the flip side, this is taking the Egyptian side, that if you are now surrounded by this darkness, maybe it's a type of darkness because you realize how terrible you've been to a whole slew of people, right? We do know those types of stories from the Holocaust, that people who came out, especially people who were young when they joined the Nazi Party, when they came out of the war and they realized what they had done and how much devastation had done to humanity, there was remorse, not by everyone, but there was some remorse and there was some apology that came after that because they entered into something they didn't understand, and now all of a sudden they understood it. So what Rabbi Kushner is saying here is that if this plague was one that also stopped their ability from seeing what they were doing and how they could get their way out of it. Which is a very interesting way of turning it on its head, that maybe this was a plague that shouldn't have happened, so that the Egyptians realized what they were doing that was so wrong and could actually grow out from it. It's a very interesting point. Okay, Nelson Mandela, not a rabbi, said, in those early years, isolation became a habit. We were routinely, this is not talking about the Torah, right? This is talking about Nelson Mandela's own history and story, which he was not old enough to be written into the Torah. We were routinely charged for the smallest infractions and sentenced to isolation. The authorities believed that isolation was the cure for our defiance and rebelliousness. I found solitary confinement the most forbidding aspect of prison life. There was no end and no beginning. There is only one's own mind, which can begin to play tricks. We hear this all the time, not just from Nelson Mandela, about solitary confinement, right? It can actually drive a person crazy. And part of that is because, just like sitting in the dark, you don't know what's coming next. You have no clock. You have no ability to speak to other people to understand the track of time. It's why so many of the hostages who were in tunnels as opposed to in homes in Gaza were, or hospitals or wherever they were kept, if they were in a tunnel, they have many more mental deficiencies and emotional, obviously, than people who were held in more public spaces, even if they were tortured, right? I'm not trying to say that they had like lovely lives being out of the tunnels, but by being in the tunnels, less air, less interaction with other human beings, it really does a number on your brain. And we see that also in solitary confinement when it comes to prison. Did you want to say something, Irv? Okay, so for the people who were in this darkness, right, it creates a certain type of hardship, both on you physically, but also on you mentally. Okay, the last word goes to MLK. I had never been in solitary confinement. God's companionship does not stop at the door of a jail cell. I don't know whether the sun was shining at that moment, but I do know that once again, I could see the light. So there's also moments where we are in darkness, that we have to search for the light, or that we have to ask those who have the light to help us out of our darkness, right? In the case of the Egyptians and the Hebrews, there were people who had light. But because there was no relationship, that light remained within the household. It didn't reach very far. And so if there's ways to create relationship, if there's ways to have communication, if there's ways to crawl yourself out of a darkness, that's when you're able to find that light. And I just want to end this by saying I don't think this is a plague that ever really got lifted. I think this is a plague that we know lots of people who live with or under or in. And this is a plague that just shows the humanity of the Exodus story. That, yeah, lice and vermin and blood in the water and all those kinds of things, even if they happened, there had to have been a sense that they were going to end because they seem fantastical, right? There's nothing about them that seems like, oh, this can go on forever. But darkness, it can go on forever. And there have to be ways for us to help people find the light out of that darkness. And there's a lot of that in the world right now. There's a lot of that darkness at home, abroad. As I said earlier in services, of course, in Iran, right? There's a lot of that darkness right now, and a lot of the light is being shed from elsewhere. So I hope that we are all able, especially with the words of MLK in this particular weekend, I hope we're all able to find ways to bring the light or to find the light and help others bring it into their own lives.
You've been listening to another in our series of podcasts from Temple Beth Am, a dynamic center for conservative Judaism in Los Angeles. If you enjoy these podcasts, we invite you to write a review on the Apple Podcast website or wherever you get your podcasts. For more information on Temple Beth Am, Los Angeles, please visit www.tbala.org.